What is going on, guys? Carter here with Edge Mindset. We're taking a look at the relatively new ZBT Ultratech from Microtech. So what is ZBT? Stands for Zero Blade Tolerance. Basically, this is their answer to the zero blade play concept in OTFs. Big props for them for doing this in a production line. Up until now, you could only get this in small production, custom style knives. One in particular is the Hawk Deadlock, and I'll be referencing that knife quite a bit in this video. Although I think there's others that have implemented something similar, but that's the most famous and probably the most effective example is the Hawk Deadlock. But now you can get it in a production knife. Microtech started with their famous Ultratech knife. It is their most popular seller. It is a great EDC size, fits in the pocket very, very well. And of their knives, it's one of the more affordable ones. Still expensive, but quite affordable. These come in I think $375 for the base model. And then, of course, if it's black-coated blade, serrations cost a little bit more. You know, some of the other stuff adds to it. But base model, I think, is around $375 or $379, something along those lines. Now, the goal of this video is to kind of set your expectations on this knife. Hopefully, there's multiple camps in this knife. Some people just can't believe, could it possibly be true? Did they really get rid of that pesky blade play in the knife? Other people may be wondering, is it worth it? All that kind of stuff. So my goal here is to kind of answer that question as well as give an overview of this knife. Now, the interesting thing about this knife and me is when this was announced, the drop date, they were going to drop it on microtechgear.com direct from Microtech. Many of the people I talked to asked if I was going to get in on that initial drop, and I said, no, I don't think so. And that blew their minds. They couldn't believe it. They were like, this is right up your alley. How could you not get in on this monumental knife right on the drop day? And I didn't want to. I actually was not planning on getting this knife. I ended up getting this as part of a trade for another knife. It was cash plus this knife. I needed the cash, and I thought, you know what? I do want to check one of these knives out. I always intended on getting one. I just wasn't necessarily interested in getting the very first one. And the reason for that is just very knife nerdy and collector-y and kind of lame. I just didn't see the point. These aren't serial numbered anymore, so there's no point in getting early on these. And I knew the initial drop was going to be kind of, you know, kind of bland, right? Stonewash blade, black handle, which it is a good look. I mean, this is a classic look. I have other knives in this configuration, so I thought, you know what, I'm going to wait and pick up a spicier combination of this knife. You know, maybe a Tanto with a different colored handle, something like that. But this came up in trade, and so I said, why not? Let's give it a shot. So before we dive any further into this video, does it have zero blade play? Kind of. Mine kind of. So for all intents and purposes, here, let me zoom out a little bit here because I am getting some weird focus issues because I think I'm too close to the camera. For all intents and purposes, yeah, I mean, I think you would call it zero blade play. If you grab this blade and you kind of wiggle it around, you're not going to feel it wiggling around like you would on a normal Ultratech. So here's a Outbreak Edition normal Ultratech. You can hear it. Up, down, side to side. It's so hard to see on camera because both hands are like moving. But you can see how that's flexing that way. You can see it moving that way. Minimal play, but yeah, it does. The blade wiggles and it kind of rattles around. And if you grab the blade without cutting yourself, I mean, you can hear it rattling around. On this one, that's not the case. No rattling at all. If you just grab it and kind of move it around, let me hold it still, not moving, up and down, not moving, left, right, not moving. Now, that being said, if I really muscle it and I hold it very firm, it probably looks like it's moving. It's not. It's just a combination of like my hand flexing, but there is a slight amount of movement. And the only reason I can tell it's moving at all is because you can feel something kind of bumping into something. If I couldn't feel something bumping into something, I would never know it's moving. I do have the slightest bit of blade play. Now I have disassembled this and tried to adjust that blade play out. And maybe I'm just not good enough, but I can't get it out. If I tighten it up even just a little bit, I start to have deployment issues. It won't deploy all the way in the up position because it just can't quite get enough momentum to lock out all the way and stay locked out. If I lighten it up enough that it doesn't have that issue, then I have just that slightest amount of play. Now, I have heard other people mention a slight amount of play in the knife. Once again, I don't know if this is every few of them will have just the slightest bit you can muscle and other ones absolutely do not, or if most of them are like this and people just aren't trying hard enough, because it's pretty dangerous to do that. You can see I sliced myself very, very well by doing this. I was trying to adjust it and I was muscling the crap out of it and it slipped out of my hand and just sliced right into my palm there. So that's why I decided I am okay with that slight amount of blade play, because if I have to risk bodily harm in order to get this blade to move at all, I think I'm considering it zero blade play. And like I said, for all intents and purposes, like if you just grab this, it's not moving. It's not rattling. There's no, it is in the locked out position. So, all right, now that we got that out of the way, let's do a comparison here. I'm not going to do a full-on Ultratech review. These have been done to death. I did want to talk about the changes though. They added just like 0.5 millimeter of blade length, I believe. I haven't checked this out yet. I'm trying to line this up as best I can. Yeah, it does look like the blade is just ever so slightly longer, really inconsequential, unnoticeable. In the handle here, they've thickened it up a little bit. Some may like that, some may not like that. I think they did that to help accommodate enough room for the more robust, what do you want to call it, carriage system they have in here. So they've kind of beefed everything up strength-wise and things like that, as well as accommodating the cone system. They probably needed to widen this up just a little bit. Now, it's also possible some of this is just an aesthetic reason, that they just wanted a more substantial handle. But based off taking this apart, I'm thinking they just needed a little bit more extra room for the mechanism and everything involved. You can see how it's just slightly wider. But as such, you get a wider button, which makes it a lot easier to engage. You can see that the button is more pronounced on this direction as well. Held together with Torx screws, just like all the Gen 3 Microtechs are. So very, very cool there. You can take it apart yourself. You got the deep etched logo right here that is done before it's anodized, as opposed to being like a white logo like on here. You have the single screw on the bottom here for the glass breaker, which is a little bit less obnoxious, a little cleaner of a design. Let's get a little bit closer here. You can see that inset ball right there. There's a couple different versions of this, depending on if you get the Stonewash. I forget what it is, but they have another one that's like a milled star pattern, all on this first release. And based on what I read, certain blade configurations have one over the other. I don't know why. Reversible pocket clip, which is very, very cool. This is also reversible. A lot of people are speaking as though this is the first time that you can reverse this pocket clip, but you can reverse this as well. You just remove this glass breaker and flip this whole piece around and reverse that as well. But very cool. Milled titanium like usual. They've got this nice hole in here. Just adds a little bit more design flair to it compared to some of the other milled pocket clips that are on the Gen 3s. You got the beg ball, the silicone carbide ball right there. Love this thing. It looks cool. It performs well. It is really, really awesome. It has the new easier to actuate long throw system, right? Where they basically just extended the amount of length in order to fire this thing to make it easier to fire. So very smooth, very easy to fire. It's got the Crud Cutter in there. It's got all the upgrades on the Gen 3 plus the zero blade play mechanism. So that's what we're looking at with the new Gen 3 Ultratechs. It was inevitable that something like this was going to happen, that they were going to figure out how to do the zero blade play thing. I'm hoping, I got my fingers crossed that this continues into the other brands or into the other models, the Combat Troodon, things like that. I know some people out there are probably assuming it's got to be inevitable. There's no way it wouldn't ever make it into the other models. My concern is I'm curious to see what the customer service cost has done since they've implemented this knife. So just me monkeying around with this, trying to adjust it, I can only imagine the amount of people that have royally screwed these up. Because to adjust this, you've got to take it completely apart. There's a little set screw that uses a flathead little micro screw in here that's Loctited in. Parts can be lost. Like, this seems like a knife that a lot of people are going to mess up at home if they monkey around with it. So they're going to want to send it into customer service. So it does, a little bit of concern that, the cost to support knives like this on a large scale could cause some issues. I'm legitimately afraid they're not going to push this into the other knives because it turns out that they just can't afford to support this thing. Because you got to remember, like, Hawk Deadlock, they're very expensive, and that's for a reason, because they're all like hand fined, tuned. They have a more complex mechanism inside with more parts and things like that. And then they're more able to take care of any sort of issues you have. This is a full production knife. So they've simplified the mechanism inside. They've done kind of a watered down version of something similar to what the Hawk Deadlock has done. But they've just simplified it because they've got to do it at mass scale. They've got to produce these things quickly. And I just wonder how many of these are coming back into the shop because people mess them up and it's not locking out, and they tighten something or they loosen something or they stripped or lost something inside there. So I'm curious to see how that goes. Hopefully we see this propagate throughout the entire line, because it's definitely very cool. Even with that little minimal amount of tapping side to side, I mean, this thing it's solid. Like, if you were to hand this to anybody and say, try to see if this blade moves, they would say no, because they're only going to do it lightly, because it's scary to hold on to a blade. And they would be like, this thing is rock solid. You've really got to muscle this thing in order to get any sort of like light movement side to side. But all right, so that's it. That is the overview of this particular knife. It is very, very cool. Very, very cool. I like it. I think it's a good idea. It's a good plan forward. The zero blade play thing, people have been asking for that for years. Microtech finally figured out how to do it at scale, or at least I assume they figured out how to do it at scale. So hopefully it continues to work out and we see other knives. All right, guys, I'm out. Talk to you later.